say a couple of words about the Living Archives project. So I'm delighted that Anna Maria has managed to converge with our project in such a wonderful forum and venue. And by that I mean this greenhouse, but also the talk series that Veronica has coordinated this autumn, which has a very nice quality to it and has really added something to the Living Archives project. So Anna Maria, I met 18 months ago, and we realized we had met actually 10 years ago. Yeah. And Anna Maria, this is going to be my sort of impressionistic introduction.
Brilliant.
If I make mistakes, tell me. Artist and designer and scholar, and person who has lived and worked in many countries, collaborates on many interesting projects, but brings a very particular quality of critical and material engagement to the work. I know Anna Maria in the context of working with food and food cycles in cities, but from a critical and also a poetic stance. I know she's very interested in the body in relation to research, but also in relation to sensory engagement with urban spaces through food, which is extremely exciting.
Fun.
And the Living Archive, and is currently living in Stockholm, but is doing a PhD at Chalmers in the design research faculty.
Actually, architecture faculty.
Architecture, yes, there we go. And Living Archives is a Vetenskapsrådet funded project that's going to go on for 4 years. Many of you know about it, many of you are involved with it. And it's looking at archives from the perspective of archiving practices rather than from the perspective of identifying an archive and then digitizing it. So about 12 researchers are loosely involved, and we're all working with different archives. A lot of these are unusual archives, marginal archives. The two strands of research are performing memory and open data. And we're taking quite a critical and also artistic approach to them. We're still finding our way, so we encourage you to look at the events, keep an eye on them, and see as the form of the project is developed. Right now it's a lot of strands, so we'll see what will come of it. There.
Brilliant.
That's good enough.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes.
We had a really nice, about 2-hour discussion today. 3? Oh, it seemed like a nice long time. And we're talking a lot about these strands of archiving and capturing data that doesn't really want to be captured or cannot be captured, and in what format. How do you record it? And anyway, I think one thing more is that I'm formally trained in the beginning as an architect, and then going into about 15 years of practice, I realize, not me. And so actually kind of always already early on bringing biologists to the design table, which in itself, even though it's a scientific field, I don't know if you know biomimicry, already in itself had to be an artistic process to bring sort of this architectural, urbanistic viewpoints together with somebody who studies nature. And actually for me, they're not two different worlds, they're very much the same. But this work comes from, of course, the research questions that I have kind of that have been incubating for the last 2.5 years. And this paper, actually this paper was presented recently at the Sustainable Food Planning Conference last week in the Netherlands. And I didn't like the original title of the paper, which was Extracting Urban Green Potential, Critical Design-Based Use of Digital and Bodily Co-Mapping Methods, or Cartographical Methods actually. And so I've changed it to Organoleptic Interfaces, Infectious Gardens and Digital Starvation, based on actually what are my research results from a 1.5 years, 2 years. And I'll come to this performance that actually occurred last month, at, which I've been between this kind of spectrum of both digital cartography methods that are currently being used in architecture, and I wanted to embody it a bit further into what happens if I start to use my body as a cartographical method. And of course, in all of that came various interventions of how do I relay that to planners, talking to planners about these ideas and what it means to use your body as a way of sensing the urban environment and designing from it. So I hope, I mean, these are just questions today that will come to the surface, and maybe it'd be just jump in any time with your thoughts, or because I suspect you're all from a varied spectrum of the arts or design, or where are people from? From Malmö University, is that it? Yeah? Sort of all, in which department?
I'm within interaction design.
Okay. Yeah? Oh, thanks. Okay, that sounds cool. So I start, and keep in mind that this is situated inside a university that is technical, scientific technical university, Chalmers, and artistic research is something that I think is quite new to bring into the spectrum of talking about urban planning and policy making. So I start with this quote. The Peruvian Kashinuhua hold that a wise man, Huni Unaya, has knowledge throughout his whole body. His whole body knows, they say. When I asked them where specifically a wise man had knowledge, they listed his skin, his hands, his ears, his genitals, his liver, and his eyes. Does the brain have knowledge? I asked. No, it doesn't, they responded. And I thought maybe this quote really kind of, I found this quite early on in my research process, about 2 years ago, when it was just sort of a hunch where I started thinking about, maybe I should back up. I think that when I arrived in Sweden, I don't speak Swedish very well. And I realized I have to find research methods and ways to stage my interventions and my explorations. And if the city is my laboratory, how am I going to do that? And within the sort of the area of urban agriculture, of course, gardening and using your hands and using your body became just a very natural way of communicating with people, getting to know my neighbors, getting to know the different communities and the research communities as well. So for me, this was sort of a stronghold or a foundation to knowing that I could do this. It is possible. And there's a few, Richard isn't here, Richard, who did the website, and he very kindly understood that most people would not know what organoleptic is. So I think when he advertised the thing tonight, he kind of wrote so organoleptic, and I came across something that urban organoleptics, and that for me is a city that has the ability to stimulate your senses. And I think we've sort of sanitized our city to the point where everything is desensitizing. We don't really understand sort of what is this underflow, cyclical sort of behavior that's happening underneath the city, from waste, water, our food. I mean, also sort of happens in these sanitized trucks. Everything is kind of behind the curtain. And I wonder if there's a way to bring some of all of this information to the surface. And so the urban organoleptics for me is sort of the goal of this, and how to design a design brief for city making, especially when it comes to climate change issues around food, using these kind of methods. So organoleptic is about being affected or relating to qualities of a substance that stimulates the sense organ, involving use of the sense organs. So the organoleptic evaluation of food, and I added here the organoleptic evaluation of urban food gardens or urbanscapes or of the city. An interface is, of course, a surface forming a common boundary between adjacent regions, bodies, substances, or phases, a point at which independent systems or diverse groups interact, communicate, a point at which tacit information or comes to the surface, a point of which we are made let's say ecologically aware about our behavior in the city. And for me, sustainability is not a technological, only a technological sort of endeavor. For me, it's very much an endeavor that is about a lifestyle. So how do you start to create environments that make people very, very aware of the way that they are behaving or understanding what is going on both on a microbiological level with their food, but also on an external level where they go to get it and things like that. Or where they, every day when they pass, is there a way to get people to come in contact with food on another level besides going to a shop and buying it? And of course this whole trend of urban gardens in the past few years has started that, but I think not enough yet. It's still these kind of gems that you have to kind of seek out to find, or you have to know through the word of mouth. So imagine if this became something that was a daily habit in your walk to work or whatnot, that you came across these spaces. And is there a way to generate more activity that is normative, let's say, that it's not something unusual, that it's not something that is, and I think part of that has to also happen on an urban planning level. That's not a greenwash, because currently I think it's sort of, it's skimmed upon inside urban green plans, especially for Stockholm Stad, for example. They've got half a page devoted to urban agriculture with a beautiful picture of Trädgård på spåret, which is our urban gardens on the tracks, but with absolutely no plan or no intention of creating that kind of behavior when making green spaces. So of course it's another way of creating green space in cities. This is actually in Canada. There's a fantastic woman, Constance Claassen, who has been trying, and almost it's like if you look at sort of the ingredients in this, how do you basically then start to link sustainability to the senses? And I think sustainability has become a very dogmatic discussion of negativity. Don't do this, you have to reduce this. And I think on the other sense, ecological behavior and lifestyles in cities can be something extremely pleasurable, something that actually qualitates your life to a level that you can't even, I mean, it's just, it's tied into so many things, your social relationships with people, with the community, and you know, down to maybe the things that you do on a daily basis in your job. So as we rethink urban design within the context of ecological sustainability, we need to look for urban models that can fruitfully sustain our sensory lives. The best way to encourage people to commit themselves to new modes of urban existences is by engaging them through pleasurable sensory experiences, green pleasures, rediscovered, reimagined through a revitalized cityscape. And I think art can play a role in this process through its capacity to create unprecedented situations, present parallel worlds, and make the invisible visible. In these ways, art can spark individual awareness of ethical, social, and political issues, and speak to the motivations, convictions, or emotions underlying rules or laws. The thorny question, of course, opening people's eyes is not the same as putting ideas into practice. And I think that very much depends on the sort of environments that people are confronted with within their daily behavioral patterns. There's an art historian in the room, so I'm not even going to bring up my history behind all these, but this is Smithfield Market, I think, in London. And this is what the food, if you trace, I don't know if anyone's seen Carolyn Steele's or book read The Hungry City by Carolyn Steele. It's a wonderful retrospective of the food history of London and how you can actually look at a map and look at street names, and they're connected to the way that food actually travelled into the city, down to Fish Market Square, where you've got down by Liverpool, I think around Liverpool Street. And Smithfield Market was where all the cattle or the livestock would be walked into the city on a certain trail, and then it would be slaughtered here in the middle of the city. And very much I can still feel that when you go to the square today, even though it's much more commercialized, sort of a meat market of London. And so this very much early on, I think this was the first month of my PhD, about 2.5 years ago, where these were some of the hints hunches I wanted to work with, where this state of urban organoleptics starts to look into the sort of the sensory lives of inhabitants and the sensory dimension of urban lifestyles, to which our 5 bodily senses contribute. Of course, taste, smell, sound, visual, and touch. I know there's many more senses, but for easy sake, I could only deal with that kind of information. So if you look at sort of the urban qualities of urban space, I think it's a two-way dialogue. It's almost a two-way dialogue. So urban environment stimulates the senses, so you've got a communication coming to you from that end, and senses also stimulate the urban environment. So looking into sort of reactions, looking into different sensescapes, and how senses actually start to become the production of space, the producers of space, the sort of urban consciousness, unconsciousness coming to the surface. So it became clear to me that somewhere the thing that I wanted to archive or catalogue was this relationship between the human body as a sensorium and its built environment. I won't go into all of that. And that, of course, was very much about different encounters and bodily engagements, looking into the senses, culture, social settings, and material features of urban space. And at this point, I didn't really know how I was going to do these kind of encounters. But I realized that it had to be a body in motion. It had to somehow, how do I start to trace the urban space using my body? So there are different ways, I mean, and that's not anything new in the artistic world, and in terms of transversing a landscape, I won't go into that. So here I started to look at what kind of senses might be caught through these different parameters. So just tactility you can look into, and this is all dealing with sort of gardens, because I wanted to very much deal with sort of the societal challenge here is about the way we eat food and the relationship between the city and food. So I did want to plant this research within some form of ecological value. So these senses are very much related to gardening and to urban gardens. So for smell, you look into city odors or food odors and rubbish and other waste odors and things like that. I see I've added some others, human odors and so forth. But this is just me starting to sort of organize. And within the last year and a half, I realized, well, this needs to happen within some sort of a platform where I feel supported with this kind of research, a platform where I can bring in different types of artists to have discussions. So very much what you're doing with this platform here, the Living Archives platform, is creating a place for discussion. And also, both of these platforms are about bringing in urban planners, bringing them to the discussion table as well, and trying to play with issues of spatial agency, where you start to take the responsibility of sorting out this huge problem of food away from just planners and into the hands of people, which means, of course, on that level, a shift in urban lifestyle when it comes to food. So Gröna Linjen is based out of Stockholm, but I'd love to do one of these next year in spring in Malmö, so we have to talk about that. It's a green line, and it was dubbed after, let's see if it was dubbed after, I don't know if you know the transport system in Stockholm, but there is one green line number 17. And oddly enough, when we started cataloging a lot of the gardens that are currently happening in Stockholm, they all somehow are sprouting around this green vein metro line through the city, which I thought was a really nice coincidence. So we decided to, of course, call the group Gröna Linjen, which also, nicely enough, is related to the actual task at hand. This platform allowed us to stage two interventions, safaris as we call them, expeditions, to take people on a journey, on an adventure through this world of urban agriculture, which I think is quite fairly new in Stockholm. I think something in the last four years where it's become something a bit more Is that for me?
Yeah.
Oh, I have one here. Oh, wow, 2. This one is warm. Hold on. Okay, yeah. So 2 safaris, one in June and one in September, which I'll talk about later. And the other platform that just recently happened, but has been planned for about a year already. And on October 21st or 23rd, we had it. I should have sent you the link so that people might have come up. We wanted to see what happens when you make this in a technical university. What happens when you start to sort of really investigate or explore or perform this interface between art and science? Is there a way to do that? So the theme of the festival was actually embodiment. And through embodiment, each day was very much dedicated to different parts of the body. So day 1 was about your feet, day 2 was about the head, and day 3 was about the torso, sort of the central locating part of your body, and very much the torso, because a lot of the Buto dance that I've been working with, a lot of the motor of movement actually comes from the torso, from your pelvic area, rather than up here in your chest, where we mostly move with in Western sort of world. So I thought that was quite interesting. And Buto is a form of Japanese a dance performance. But foam is another platform, and foam is very much, it's a transdisciplinary laboratory. And it's a collection, a network of different artists around the world, artists, gardeners, chefs, IT people and things like that. And we have little studios in Brussels, Amsterdam, Stockholm and Cornwall now. And we very much work around the motto, grow your own worlds. So everything we do is somehow circulating around food or plants, or trying to think about society through that kind of a lens all the time, and what it means both to us as artists, but also what kind of journeys it takes us on. And I won't go into too much, but with the first day of the festival, we looked at what it means, of course, to transverse a landscape. And this is nothing new in the world of artistic research and so forth. On the left, we have Hamish Fulton. I don't know if anybody is familiar with his work. He's quite a well-known artist in the UK, who since the 1970s has very much used walking as a medium. This is his artistic medium. He has gone on walks that actually last 40, 50, 60 days through parts of the world. And very much he's interested in sort of the state of ecological degradation, and trying to use his body and walking as a way to experience what's happening, looking the sort of border between ecology and cities and urbanization, and experiencing it from sort of the ground. And then we have Francesco Carreri, who is with Roma Tre University in Italy. And he uses walking as a research tool. He's written a very nice book called Walkscapes. And he traces how actually walking is a tool for knowledge. It has been used as a research tool throughout civilization. It's how we've created information about the globe, how we've made maps. It's such a strong instrument. And in architecture, we've kind of lost this behavior with the cityscape. We go into aerial Google map, and that's how we decide what a site will look like, and we draw on top of that. But I mean, this idea of actually just going to the site, and we go to the site, of course, and we go visit it, but it's a bit different. It's still externalized. It comes in through this piece of paper, and you've printed it out, and you've zoomed through Google and looked at it. And Francesco stages these kind of walks around the world, and he calls them emotional walks. In a way, lately he's been always kind of using fear as the place to walk to. So perception of fear, places that people might fear to go to, he goes there. because he thinks it's just a perception. So he wonders how you would get to that place. If that place was a destination rather than something that you walk away from and you walk to, what then happens in that? How does your relationship with the city shift at that point? So anyway, in both of these performers, we invited to day one of the AHA festival, which was, they had never met, they had always read about each other, and it was so curious to see them work together. We had hoped that they would actually stage a walk together, but they both had such different ideas. Both Francesco wanted to go outside, and Hamish wanted to stay inside. So obviously we had a bit of a tension there. So it brought me down to the tools of going to creating a digital tool, cartography tool called Urban Co-Mapper. And that's been in the past year up till about June, when the first safari from the Gröna Linjen in June was actually the release of this tool and trying to use it. And now I think since September I've been going into the bodily cartography. So this is quite early on, and I've staged my performances, but I haven't had enough reflective time yet off of the bodily cartography. So it's really nice to sort of share that with you. And very much realizing during the sort of creating the app, how the information that I wanted, this whole organoleptic relationship with the city, I couldn't capture it with the phone. I couldn't get it. I didn't know what kind of questions to ask, or how do I, and that's why I sort of wrote this thing about digital starvation, because I just was really hungry for understanding how am I going to capture this design brief that I ultimately want to write or ultimately want to investigate. And so I could see that it failed, and actually in the failing proved the point that actually the bodily cartography is going to be much more useful in this research. So this was the idea of the app. Boring. I won't go into it, but the idea was to create, since so many urban gardens, of course, are popping bottom up, and there are places that are in between. A lot of people don't know about them, and how do you start to connect them? How do you create kind of these green veins through cities where you can then look into issues of biodiversity and create these kind of biodiversity corridors through the city? And for me, the planners don't really know how to handle this. They don't know how to write about this, and they don't know how to write policy for this. And it seemed that the people who actually have to do this are people who are making these gardens, or people who want to make these gardens. So this app basically created the opportunity to both map existing and potential spaces for gardening, because I think the promise of a new place to grow, or the promise of yet another garden, is really, really interesting. And how do you catch that? So you can't let the planners decide that. It actually needs to be people who want to do it. And I mean, most of the gardens that survive are the ones that are started by a strong person within a community, a steward that keeps the energy up and has the skill and so forth. So this was supposed to be a communicative platform between city inhabitants and city professionals, such as even architects, landscape architects. And it's actually taken the idea of agency from the professional to the citizen. So it's about transferring spatial agency in the hands of people who are actually using these spaces or living in the city on a daily basis. And it was not supposed to be a point location app. That's not the idea of it. That is not informative at all. It doesn't help any design process. So here was sort of, who do you represent? We wanted to understand both how professionals view people who are designing, how they view certain spaces in the city, and also how a city inhabitant might view. And so this is just a prototype of the app. We had a rubbish app designer who, too late in the process, I realized could not deliver the playful tool that this was intended to be. So what I had wanted didn't occur, and the money ran out. And now, but at least I can call it a prototype. And of course here you can go into existing foodscape and potential foodscape. And the idea was that you really start to understand what is, for an existing site, what kind of people are there, what are the built elements around, what is the climatic character of it, what is the character of it. You can upload sounds and videos and photographs. So you can imagine that the information coming in, the data coming in, is not just sort of a point location, but it's real-time mapped information that most of this stuff that is being mapped right now is in retrospective. So it's, you come back to your house and you, on a lot of the sort of data planning surveys, right now you have to go home and log in and then you type in your information, but you're not on site. So it's very different how you experience a site when you're there, and the kind of information you can relay when you're in real time than when you do this in retrospective. So that was another idea, and we wanted this to happen kind of fast, on your way to work, on your way to see a friend. You happen to pass a place and you think, God, this is a fantastic place to grow vegetables, and I'm actually looking somewhere. And so, and the same for potential, but you can see the sensorium totally fails. Like because you click on these and you go inside and there'll be different kind of little, there's a multiple choice. It just looks like a bloody academic survey, what they've designed. You can actually go, it's in urbancomapper.com. You can go into the app if you want to. So I'm quite disappointed. And this is just, the idea was that you would then go into these point locations and you would touch on this, and then you would have this whole cauldron of knowledge coming out, like sounds and people you could contact. So you can imagine the sort of network that could happen with this. But yet somehow it didn't work. Yeah.
Was there an interest for this kind of functionality? Just that the design was bad? But was there, people see the potential of it, just like you?
Yeah, I think people can see the potential of it, and that where it is now is that Södertälje is a little bit interested in it, and they're starting up an urban agriculture program. So it would be really great if we could design a really good team around this that can actually then take the app to another level. Because I mean, it's so trendy right now to put urban agriculture into these planning procedures, but they don't really know how they're going to do it. And the interest, I mean, I saw the need for this kind of a platform just through sort of working within this field of food development for years. And yeah.
No, sorry, I just have another question.
Yeah, go for it.
And this is because I don't know, so it might be a stupid question.
No.
But these people looking for new places to
grow
stuff, do they see these new places as kind of hidden treasures, just like your mushroom spots? You know, in Sweden you don't tell where you.
Aha, I see what you mean.
Like the super secret. You don't even tell it to your family.
I don't know. I mean,
is it something that they do want to share with people?
I think they do, because a lot of these gardens work on the basis of a community growing together. And I think because, I don't know how the situation is in Malmö, and I think you have a different scale to deal with. I mean, I know a little bit about the situation here, but in Stockholm, all the private allotment gardens have a really long waiting list. It takes a really long time to get a plot that you can grow on. And so the idea of, and also not everybody has the time to take care of a plot. And actually we have a garden, we started in my housing unit, we started our own garden. And it's what works as a group doing this together, because there's always someone looking after it, and we go on holidays and there's someone watering it. So it's not really, you don't want top secret. And what works, I mean, we've had about 3 people join us who just, this is their running route, and they run past our garden every morning, and finally, I mean, it took them like 8 months to stop and finally sort of ask us, but they did, and now they garden with us. So I think the idea of these spaces, and especially if we link this back to this paradigm shift in the way we think about food, is about creating these spaces that almost become ubiquitous in the urban landscape, and are not top secret. We never have anything stolen. I mean, it's not like you're wanting to hide something. We have a little, it's not even a fence. I don't know what it is. It's like this little stick thing about this high, but it's enough to get people to understand the kind of private public space. And it's not that it's a private space, but it's still kind of, it's a very visual tone of understanding that, oh, this is the edge of this, so to speak. But no, you want people to come. I mean, personally, I want them to come. I love when people are there, and it's not like we're gardening all the time, and we never have problem with masses. So that won't happen. But I mean, imagine walking through a city where this is commonplace in the way that we live in a city, and that it's not just one for every 3 kilometers, but it's actually like this wonderful, almost mushrooms popping up all over the place.
But Amanda, I wonder if you think about, you mean like you refer to sort of, that you grow stuff and then someone else comes and harvests.
Is that what you're thinking?
Precious radish and your precious. Is that sort of what you think about? Because we have an allotment here in Elizabeth, and I have chatted with the trädgårdsmästare, the gardener, John Taylor. I don't know how you call him, he's probably the directing sort of gardener here in Slottsträdgårdens. And he says that, oh, you should be very careful that you don't, that you can plant around your potatoes, you can, so that you can hide them.
Oh.
You have to find ways to sort of maybe disguise, that you, and also to be prepared that your vegetables and things that you grow might disappear.
Yeah. Have you had any problems?
Have we?
Have you?
No. I was expecting that.
No.
But it didn't happen.
It doesn't. It's again this perception of fear.
But it does.
Does it?
Yeah, and it's a big discussion that also that they know who it actually is, and like they are sold in the other part of the city, etc. But
I think it was more. And then maybe I'm more referring to kind of the Swedish way of being. That if you find a really good place, you want to be kind of, I was first to saw it. When I went on this trip, and it was so fantastic, this restaurant, you would not believe. And that's kind of...
And you don't want to tell people so that it becomes...
Well, maybe you tell, but you say maybe that, oh, it's really hard to find, I don't know if...
I don't know, but you can... It's interesting, because it does, I think after my licentiate, I'm planning to go into this discussion of private-public space, because that's, I mean, we're shifting what we think is public space now in cities. The idea of public space, the idea of where people come together, the activity of publicness is changing. So, I mean, this is a new type of public activity, public-private activity. So it depends where you put this garden. So for us, we're by these housing units, just by actually quite a walked road. And we've never had anyone steal something. We've had someone come and plant something. And we thought, let's just leave it there. It's quite fun. Yeah. So actually people come and add. But then you have like Trädgård på spåret, which is in quite a, if you know Stockholm Skanstull, the on the tracks, they've had people come and steal something. And it has something to do when the press got elevated, when they got elevated in press, like as all of the stuff coming out, then sort of the stealing rose as well. So you could see that correlation. But that garden is very public, and the community around it is very public, because it's not people who live entirely around it, but it's people from all over Stockholm that come and garden there. So our garden is a bit more public-private, even though anyone is welcome to join, which makes it public. It's still sort of more of a private garden because it's nestled between housing. So I think it depends where you situate it in the city, and that's why it's interesting when you start mapping this, because we won't know that, but people who live there know this information. Planners will never know, because they don't live there. And I mean, our embodied experience of the neighborhood we live in is so much more richer than somebody looking at it from Google Earth. So I find cities should be planned by citizens in some ways. I mean, that's what I believe.
And then you might know this, but just to stick in one word about Malmö is, you know, they are really wanting to facilitate, and they are doing, they're mapping the city to really find all the sort of square meters that can be potential
gardens. Wow. Is that the planners doing that, or is it?
It is the city together with an association, I think.
Okay.
And they,
I mean, I think that's amazing. The problem, the element, the ingredients missing out of this is the people who are going to take care of this. And one of the main problems is maintenance. Why the planning authorities don't want to write policy around urban agriculture is because they don't want to pay for the maintenance of this. So what you need is people who will actually become the maintainers. I don't know what the word is. So I don't know how they're going around that, because it's easy to map potential places, but you need the people who are sort of rooted in those places that want to run those gardens. So I wonder if that's the missing element in that. Curious to know.
I can tell you.
Can you? But anyway, this word keeps on popping up, digital starvation. So I found that tool limited me in many aspects, in again going back to this whole organoleptic study. So with the bodily cartography, I went into both the safaris and the Buto dance, and then I noticed when the safaris, when we did the bike ride safaris through the different gardens in Stockholm, it was this overlap between both the digital mapping, so people did the digital on Urban Co-Mapper during the bike ride, and this kind of movement transversal through a site, and this kind of group that they did it with. So it was kind of this interesting clash between both using your body and then also using this phone as an interface, which then you can actually have a discussion with someone. Whereas when you were alone and you were using this app, almost those discussions and that interaction with someone else was missing, and the information was different. It was, it just became, you couldn't conceive the place as a place where people came together because you were there alone. So that's also, when you relay information and when you take in data, it depends how you do it, who you do it with, what you're doing while you're doing it. I think all of that is encapsulated in that experience of data retrieval. So a little bit more about the sense, and this is again very much what you guys are doing with this whole aspect of phenomenology. Sense experience is that vital communication with the world which makes it present as a familiar setting in our life. It is to it that the perceived object, perhaps the urban context, and the perceiving subject, society, owe their thickness. It is the intentional tissue which the effect to know will try to take part. This was a very beautiful master thesis by Lillemor Boschek that came out about a year and a half in the Department of Architecture at Chalmers. And I mean, it probably is quite, makes sense to you, but within an architectural technical school, this was groundbreaking. She wrote her entire thesis on the use of non-intended bodily use in the city. That these places were not designed for the way that she's using them currently. So in that way, she's also a dancer. In that way, she started seeing these spaces from a different perspective and bringing up really interesting questions about public space, private space, niches, and things like that. It brought up a really interesting discussion in our university about, but how does this information then get used in order to create urban spaces? And it starts to put, of course, the body in the as a central figure within that design. But unfortunately, she only did it for 6 months, and I think it would be a wonderful PhD to continue. And then, of course, this bodily engagement that we have with the garden, which is both internalized and externalized, and that that bodily cartography for me happens also in the eating and in the sharing and in the growing and so forth, and in the watering, and sort of that kind of different kinds of hierarchies that happen within a garden space, which all in itself, you're mapping these spaces in a way. You're receiving information all the time. This was just the beginning. This should have been earlier on. This is the tracing of these along the green line where I saw all of these main urban gardens started to happen. And safari number 1 happened in June earlier this year. And this safari was very much mostly only were existing gardens, not so much potential. But we rode almost 30 kilometers during the day. But what became quite clear was the gardeners didn't know each other, so the gardens didn't know each other. And then the people living in the neighborhoods didn't know the gardeners, or that the gardens existed. So all this information that I think is quite, which you think people know, don't know. So how do you bring this to the surface and get people to locate themselves within the growing community? But we also wanted to bring artists into this dialogue between growing food and art. So along the way, we had different sort of interventions from garden. This is my garden up here. This is quite earlier on this year. This was about May, so it's just the beginning. So you can see that kind of that path here of a lot of people walking or going running, and sort of us just being here gardening and people stopping.
Where is it?
It's in Fredhall, Mellara Piraternas, by Orvar Oddsvik. Come visit. Come when we have food. This is Trädgård på spåret down here. This is Skarpnäck in the very south, the last line, and that is Hornstull up there by the Högalits kyrkan. And there we had actually a series of 2 gardens. We had one on the grass that we opened up, and also one on a rooftop of 100 hus. And then the second Gröna linjen happened in September, and I was surprised people came because it was raining so hard. We were all just completely soaked, sort of riding our bicycles through these different gardens. But we ended in the end, and then the Sunshine Socialist Cinema came up from Malmö, which was a real shame because they were supposed to screen their films, and we got totally rained out and they couldn't bring out the equipment. So actually one of the people who was at the safari lived close by, so we all huddled into his living room and watched the films that Kalle wanted to show, which was quite kind, about, I don't know which films he showed here in the greenhouse talks a few weeks ago. Did he show the urban agriculture ones? No.
He showed material related to mining.
Aha, interesting. But he had all of these films, historical films, and about not just Malmö. He had one about Malmö, but he had one about Gothenburg, the Comet Torre, all these wonderful films around urban agriculture. And then we ended up in a potential site, which we thought was quite interesting here. And the city came, and one of the city planners actually came. So I mean, to both events we had city planners come, which I think is quite unique. Both of them happened on a weekend, so it's not something that could have been. You had to come out of your way to join it. Yeah, I mean, here's just a few images from the first one. Of course, eating along the way was very important. This idea of mapping these gardens not only on a bicycle but also through your stomach, and understanding what kind of memories. We talked about memories from taste. What kind of memories you can build in each of these different places. Malin Lobel, I think you know her. She was here. She staged this. She did her piece on whether plants can be political, and that was one active discussion also in one of the gardens. Andrea Histendal, her sister actually lives here in Malmö, who is a raw food chef. Andrea Histendal, she's an artist who for many years has been collecting food waste from different supermarkets and then staging meals with this food in different galleries and so forth. So Andrea actually, she did a meal for us at the end of the first safari where she had collected fruits and vegetables wasted and cooked that for us. And we wanted to talk about different ways that artists are using urban agriculture as an art form or as a stage for their work. So we had discussions around that. There's 2 of those. And so this is the artistic research and taking it a step further. What happens if I continue on this theme of the body as a tool? And at the AHA festival on the 3rd day, I wanted to produce sort of a layering of a site from different perspectives. So this was the first layer of this intervention, which was the students had to. Has anyone read Masanobu Fukuoka, The One Straw Revolution? It's a beautiful book written by a Japanese farmer who actually invented natural farming. And natural farming is, you could also call it do-nothing farming. Oh dear. Okay. And rather than have them read the book and learn it that way, what I had them do was I asked them to build a set using only paper. I asked them to build a set that embodied natural farming as a concept, and they had 3 hours to do it. And it was incredible to see what happens when you start to mold this type of information or understand this kind of concept through using your hands rather than sort of just reading about it or writing about it. And it was fantastic. They created this setting. It's hard to see from the photographs. They created this setting that they wanted to work through the different seasons. So different parts of this setting, they started to sort of create farming in different seasons. But also, so with the sky, she's making some clouds here. Here you've got autumn happening. And of course, also on the ground. So we had a crew that was responsible for the ground. We had a crew that was responsible for the air. And then we had a crew that was responsible for the edges. It was really enjoyable. So here we're creating sort of this physical space for the performance. The performance was a Buto dance from Frauke, Caroline Lundblad. I don't know if anyone knows about Buto. Yeah. So Buto is a form of Japanese dance. I won't go into it entirely. But it's interesting, the first time I did Buto, I think it was about a 2-3 hour workshop. The only thing I could do afterwards was sleep. And what it is, it's about taking you out of, it's sort of erasing your social body. And the choreography in a Buto is actually improvised and taken from a site, from the space that you are in. So how you move and is reading the site, because yourself, your vessel is no longer there. You are just a sort of reflection of what is happening around you. And for me, this idea or this relationship with the space was the first way I could think about on how to capture that dialogue I spoke about in the beginning. Is how could I actually, is there a way, I mean, now I'm stuck in the space where I'm trying to understand how do I record that? It happens through an experience. I experienced it. So I did a workshop. Frauke took me on a workshop. I could sleep afterwards. That's it. My senses were so overloaded. So you could hear. I mean, you get blindfolded, and you get led through. She led me through the botanical gardens in Gothenburg, and I had to listen to physical things like so I didn't knock into them. So it's almost like your senses got sort of redistributed with your body, and you were exhausted afterwards because you went on sensory overload. And I realized how little we use the rest of our senses on a daily basis. Because if we did, we'd be sleeping all the time. And so what she's doing is she's performing in this sort of farmed landscape. She hadn't seen this landscape until she arrived to do the performance. And I think there's a few techniques within Bhutto, such as, I think slime is one, twisting power is another one. I think the other one, something about the stone world, is another. These are techniques within the Bhutto world. But so she's kind of in that space, moving through it. And then the next layer, which you can't see here, is actually the musical layer. And so the music is actually performed by a South African artist called Derek Gripper. And he was asked to write a piece in recognition of Masanobu Fukuoka's work. So what he did is he wrote, it's very beautiful, but he wrote sort of these different pieces very much modeled on the Malian kora music, where he created concepts around what would music be like if it was, what would a seed ball be like, you know, guerrilla gardening. What would a seed ball be like if you embodied it in music? What would it sound like? And he started looking at these different concepts. What would a natural cycle sound like if you started working with it as a pattern of different tones that this particular instrument can do? And the way that this music, so again, what the third layer here is the idea of creating three-dimensional space using sound that has been modeled off of the concept of natural farming, which the way you play it, he created 8 tracks, and the way that you play it is, of course, you surround the space with 8 speakers, and each speaker is playing a different track. So as you're moving around the space, you hear different tracks from these sort of patterns that he's created with the different themes, which in itself creates a real diversity of setting. And you can imagine that as she moved around this space, she would have been yet in another context, not just a physical context, but also a acoustical context, which she then would have reacted to. We failed. We failed because somehow we couldn't get the tracks to work. The player had been damaged at the Biennale. This was staged earlier this year at the Venice Biennale, and not the Bhutto performance, but the musical acoustic performance, and it had been water damaged. So unfortunately, what happened is we had to play the tracks in a sequence, which is very, very different from. You can see that in that sense, the performance failed. I can play you a little bit of it. How do I play? No. How do I push? It's just a little piece. So this is the first track still. And she's just come into the space.
This is the first time she wore the costume, wasn't it?
Yeah. Every costume she makes is made very specially for, and it's only used once.
But does she make it also?
No, she has a person that makes the costume with her. So all she knew was that she was going to be performing in a space that was a artificial garden in a sense, but also a space made of paper. And so that was her design brief in terms of creating the costume. Sorry, this is about middle of the performance. We've changed tracks there. Was really, why did we use paper? Because we wanted, did you say why?
Yeah.
Again, it's sort of harking on to an instrument that we use in architecture so much, which is paper. It's where we usually draw on, it's what we trace on, and this is trace paper in particular. We only wanted to use one type of paper because we also didn't want her to get paper cuts, which was very important. But it's such an, this is what we use to draw, to plan, to create concepts. so there's that level of creation happening there too.
Yes, but I still believe when it's a sustainable performance, they use aesthetically sustainable
Yeah.
materials. But and I was like, wow, I hope that paper was recycled.
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, it wouldn't think that if it was
Definitely recycled. I mean, it's like.
Has she heard the music before? No. She hasn't heard the music before.
Yes, she has. But she had, the way she was expecting it to be played was through the 8 tracks.
Yeah, so it's
So I don't think she minded, which is really interesting because I saw her a few moments before the performance, and it's like they go into this trance. You can't. It's very hard to speak to a Buto dancer who's about to perform.
Buto dancers will often internalise imagery. We were doing Buto years ago, and significant images that stayed with me were wheat and ice. And I remember doing long improvisations where we held the concept or image or idea of wheat in our body and saw where that movement and then shifted into ice. So that you told her there was paper. It's interesting because she's probably holding on to some notion of paper and letting that feed outwards at the same time as responding.
I wonder. I'm gonna.
You sort of digest it. I'm thinking also in terms of food. When you take the image into your body
and then bring it out.
Some people say it's cellular, but most Buto teachers won't.
Molecular.
I mean, most Buto teachers won't actually give you that level of detailed instruction. They'll just say wheat.
Yeah, go.
you really feel it, don't you?
She was trained. She trained Buto with the Weather Project with Tanaka, just outside of Tokyo, and I mean, to me, it's just absolutely fascinating that she learned this through farming. They had to farm on the paddy field. That's how she learned all of the different Buto movements and I was telling her, oh, maybe I should go and do, just to try and understand this more, and she's like, don't do it. She says they're crazy and it's totally nuts. And it's that evening we had a really open discussion with her, and it's so interesting how she can actually flip from just sitting and discussing and then go into the Buto state. Like, it's just like, she's so good at it. She's wonderful.
How old is she?
She's early 30s, somewhere in there. So she's still, I mean, still in the beginnings, but she's wonderful. And then after the performance, later on in the day, we staged a Buto workshop, and I really wanted to kind of investigate the idea of surface dialogues, or what kind of dialogues we have with different surfaces, what kind of reaction, what happens. So we took, some students signed up for this, and it was just such a lovely talk towards the end about the way that we are taught architecture and the way we are taught materiality as architects, which has nothing to do with an embodied sense of what these different materials do to us, and that part of our training is so missing. And imagine how differently we would design cities and spaces if we actually really to the core understood what a particular material can emit or do to you or not do to you, and so forth. And of course, changing through the seasons, how materials feel differently during the summer where they totally heat up, and in the winter where they're very cold and icy, and all of that. So I just end with this little quote. As places sensed, senses are placed, and as places make sense, senses make place. I don't know, I think that's it, but it's probably more questions than answers for you. But it was just a few techniques through sort of the things, a very fast run through some of the things that I've been doing in the last year and a half. And looking forward to what happens next. I think I would like to go more into using other dance formats. There is this kind of pressure to use technology, and this is an interesting discussion to have with interactive designers. There's this pressure to sort of people keep on telling me, but okay, why don't you connect the dancer to a heart monitor? Why don't you connect the dancer to, you know, there's this kind of, this desire to capture some form of data that is readable, that I can put into my computer and show the results. And I'm kind of, I'm curious, I would like to do it, but then I also kind of, I'm curious, what would love to compare it to data that isn't captured in that way. And I don't know. What are your thoughts? Oh, and this is another, oh yeah, anyway. Very interested in this whole idea of our central nervous system and our sensory systems, and understanding where that goes and how that both connects to our spine and to our brain. And I think some of this information also needs to happen on this sort of level. And we talked about the word biophilia. I don't know if you know this, but biophilia is very much our sort of a primal link to nature. It's the thing that we're drawn towards nature. Our relationship with nature is very much biophilic, and I think very much, I wonder if we start to use this kind of this draw as a way to kind of establish our status about the way we feel about the environment and how aware we are of it and what we are doing to it as a singular person, and also as a society. So I don't know. Did any of that make sense? What's that? And that's me. That's it.
Have you thought of, actually, it just made me think of, I know here in Malmö we have a forest just outside of town, which is the
Skog? It's a forest, right?
Forest of books.
Of books?
Birch.
No.
Yeah, birch.
No.
No? Beach?
Oh.
Beach? Beach?
But they have, they take kids out, like primary school classes of kids out to explore the forest, because many kids here in Malmö, even though they live so close to the forest and the water or the ocean, they haven't explored it. They
Yeah.
haven't been out in nature, they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And they also take group of kids with different diagnoses, like Asperger or ADHD, to make them also experience nature and calm them. And it does something with them. And I thought of it when I saw that slide about the central nervous system and those kind of things, how nature can affect in a very positive way.
Yeah. I mean, you've got Alnarp here, we talked about this today, the idea of rehabilitative gardens.
Yeah.
The whole model at Arnarp that has been designed to deal with different sort of mental, people who in different mental states. Certain gardens, certain types of, a forest garden versus a berry versus a smell garden, like a medicine garden, and so forth. So different things can kind of communicate to different aspects of how are you feeling, or different emotions. And I mean,
Have you thought of those kind of things?
oh yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing, that if you started experiencing the city as a de-stressor rather than a stressor, I mean, you can very much use green space in cities to rehabilitate and de-stress everyday urban lifestyles. So I mean, shouldn't only be used in instances of where you've reached a mental state that is gone beyond something, where you go to these gardens. But why can't we think of green spaces in the city as spaces where we reconnect to nature? And we talked about, why do you have to go outside of the city and sort of adopt this self-sufficient lifestyle in order to have a strong relationship with nature? And I mean, there's so much plots you could use and stimulate, and I mean, as the environmental situation gets tighter and more stressed, I think our urban lifestyles would just rise in stress. And is there a way to, even in a walk to work, to have almost this kind of urban therapy? You know, I know when I walk to my studio, I walk along the water in Stockholm, and that for me is a form of therapy. So I don't know. I think, how do we start very much to make the people who make our cities more aware of what they are, what is being done, or not just in terms of creating this divide between human and nature, because I don't think it's a divide. I mean, right now, very much all of the urban sustainability, urban development stuff is catered towards, let's say, ecosystem services, or towards biodiversity, which again is externalizing nature as us and them, this kind of dual relationship. But I mean, I think urban inhabitants, just as much, we are a species. So how do you cater to the sort of this biophilic urge that we have as well when we design cities? It's a whole different form of education, I think, in the way that we are creating planners and architects. And so I mean, this my research, let's say, I've had to encapsulate it in something called I have to put it into a box which is called artistic research, which is not the normal kind of research that is being performed inside a architectural institution. So originally, when I was applying for a PhD, I applied to artist institutions. I didn't want to do this in an architectural institution, but perhaps it's good that it's landed there. So maybe through luck of the draw.
Have you thought of parkour?
Parkour? What's that? Free running. Is that like with the little map, like orientating?
Oh, the people that
Oh, the ones that jump from roof to roof.
yeah.
You just draw a straight line from point A to point B, and you just go over or under or across, whatever happens to be. And that's one version of it.
Oh wow, no, I haven't. I mean, that's another.
They make use of the city as a playground,
Yeah.
and some of them even do it almost as a dance or a performance, and they don't see it as obstacles; they just see it as ways to.
Yeah.
It's like Guitar on steroids.
On another height. Ooh, no, I haven't thought of it. I wonder if I have to take out insurance.
Because that's another way of making use of what we have. It's concrete and steel and stuff, but how can we make it? Well, that's how they see it. Something beautiful, and
Yeah.
it's their almost room to explore. Just
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I will. I know that kind of. I don't know if this is parkour, but there's that whole team in there's a name for it in New York, where they start exploring New York City through the sewers, and they take you down under, and you start actually tracking the city through this underbelly world. You put on these suits, and you go through these corridors that you're not usually in. It's a totally different experience of the city. I mean, it's such a waste.
What that brings up too is a domain just close to the sensory domain, but slightly beyond it, and it's something I'm exploring at the moment, which is affect, and how affect actually is transported by senses, but perhaps it's more liminal and opens onto emotional qualities, but also body states. I think Buto is highly effective, because you might launch from senses and then generate a sort of cloud-like state that will be shared across people and the environment.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, when you've done it seems like you do a sort of phenomenological take on the city, where you start with the five senses, but if you're aware of how the affective qualities might come in, like it might be about being peaceful or about being fearful. Or I was struck when you said about the app that it was the promise of a garden, because the promise is also an affective term. And it's interesting because agency isn't usually associated with promise, but the idea of combining an affective quality with what is usually considered an aspect of political philosophy or identity politics, agency. Do I feel empowered to speak and act? It's have I got enough agency to generate an affective state such as promise or hope for
Yeah.
regeneration or transformation.
Yeah.
I think it's,
I mean, I think
yeah.
that I think the promise of it, of course, very much has to be materialized in order for it to come into, almost to become real. And I think I think that's, yeah, I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, but yeah.
But I
Yeah.
I'm seeing this in like it's in the cracks of the research. And
Yeah.
the promise is, it doesn't have to become real. I mean, it's a state and a quality that is there.
Yeah.
And once it's become real, perhaps it's something else.
It's, oh,
But
here's,
the absence
yeah.
of the ability to sense promise is quite alarming. And I think that's the problem with a lot of urban states. It's like there may not be even the ability to see your city with the possibility
yeah.
of bringing
I just thought
children.
I just
Yeah.
got the track back. So like the promise of a place, and once it becomes real, the promise shifts
Yeah.
to a hope of a better future almost. It then goes and travels in time. So the temporality of that promise becomes larger and better. And I think that's the thing that's kind of a core to what I think is about environmental living and thinking. And that's what's missing, because all of that is actually put into the hands of technology nowadays. The way that we're trained as architects, sustainable architecture, the way we're ecologically, all our handbooks, it's all about a technical solution. Of course, the social comes into it, but nobody gets down into the sort of the micro level of what environmental awareness is, because it is something internalized. Your relationship to nature, like you said. I mean, what if you haven't grown up in nature? What if you've grown up in a very stark, concrete landscape your whole life? And as an adult, how can you create landscapes that help anyone at any age develop that kind of environmental awareness without telling them that they have to do it? So it's like,
It strikes me that this conversation feels very similar to dialogues that have been happening in the museum and culture sector for a long time, in terms of museums becoming these churches where people go to recharge and meditate and do all sorts of things except, look, actually, which is interesting, because what it says, to me at least, is that the city is becoming more claustrophobic, and there is a need for spaces which kind of syncretically make you think you're part of something bigger that's elsewhere, right? Whether the urban landscape is connecting you to a desert somewhere that gives you this sense of peace and isolation and all that, and in the case of museums, culture, art, taking you to other altered states of consciousness, thinking outside of the institution, the frame itself.
yeah.
So I'm just wondering, like, what's happening in cities? Or trying to get out, actually. That's, but emotionally, consciously, psychologically, rather than physically.
Yeah.
Because it seems that we're also stuck at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's going to sound stupid, but for me, when I started gardening, and this is something that I'm learning, I'm not good at it, it's a form of active spirituality for me, in some ways, and it reinstates my relationship to the environment through practice, through doing something, through using my body, and it becomes something quite tangible, something I can understand, through the seasons, looking at it, looking after it. I don't know, it's quite a personal way of, but yeah, I'm not going to allow.
So the urban garden is a new church.
It is. It's a new. It's some way.
But it could also be
Yeah. It's
gardening. There is no shortcuts. You
Yeah.
can't transform. You have to. It has its stages, and it's not very forgiving either.
No.
If you do it the wrong way, or if you don't keep, the pieces out of the way.
Yeah.
I mean, especially in this society where everything is, the faster the better, and we need new info all the time.
And I mean, Bhutto very much works with time and space. That's sort of the other sort of parameters or elements in this choreography. And I think time, and in terms of, if I'm talking about environmental awareness, our aspect of seasonal time, seasonal behavior, the time it takes to grow something, to raise something. A chicken in what, 21 days now, basically? It's disgusting. 21 days from a chicken is born to the point it's stuffed with hormones to the point the way it arrives on your plate. It's disgusting, and our aspect of speeding up time is becoming just like some sort of So it's I think with the seasons, like you're saying, you come complete in contact with how long it takes something or how long something should take, and you can't play with it. I mean, but now, and then also with things speeding up through climate change, for example, that's another interesting relationship of understanding how seasons are shifting. And when we eat what,
I think that makes me think that we're referring to part of the world where we have seasons.
Yeah.
What about the part of the world where we don't have really the season? They don't change. And
No.
the perspective of time is so different.
Yeah.
I don't know whether
I mean, you could
thought
take.
is really what question it leads to, but just it's there.
It's very I've lived in a place where it doesn't have many seasons.
Yeah.
I've lived in California.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can't locate yourself. You can locate yourself a little bit. There'll be some rain, but
of course it's very important thinking about gardening.
when
You don't have that seasonal sort of urgency or
no,
the cycle, of
no.
course, but also the
abundance.
yeah,
The
also
word abundance
understanding
comes to
of
mind.
time and how to be rushed or not is so different.
But wouldn't plants still have seasons even in Mexico and California? Is there an avocado season and a lemon season?
They happen more
Is that
often.
artificially
So no,
illustrated?
you have harvests more often, for
Yeah.
example. So in Goa, for example, I think they have 2 to 3 harvests during the year, whereas we only have 1. I think they have 2 harvests during the year in their cycle.
And then I guess they have to have special plants as well.
Yeah.
Since they don't.
Yeah, because in between there somewhere is the monsoon, and and that doesn't happen twice a year. That happens once a year. So they have that kind of thing. So you'll have different things during the year. But then what I thought was quite interesting, I mean, our relationship to the seasons, even though they may not be as exaggerated as they are here, as a person experiencing that season, I still kind of put on a lot of clothes when I thought it was winter, or when a slight change of temperature, I mean 5 degrees or something, you still have this kind of behavioral pattern, even though the seasons are not. So I wonder if that's something to work with or to think about as well. And the thought is abundance. I mean, now when I go back to California, there's so much growth, so much vegetables, so much fruit, so much of everything, so much, you can and then, here everything, a lot of stuff is, I really miss tomatoes and garlic. Those are the 2 things I miss the most when I moved to Sweden. But you start to really see the difference. And I've been trying to eat seasonally. This is something I've been teaching myself, and it's not something you learn in one season. It takes years to kind of really develop that kind of ingrained behavior. Yeah.
You get the box that is just.
I did. I subscribed to Ekoladen, and I got so pissed off at them because, being a researcher, the box arrived and I was like, oh, what's in here? So I started to take the box around, and I started to map where the farms were all over Sweden, where the produce was coming from in this box. And the 600 kilometers away, my mangold was coming from Skåne up to Stockholm. And I was like, this is not a vegetable. And it was the box that was like Swedish, local produced, nära producerat, Swedish produce. So nothing came from outside of Sweden. And that's when I stopped my subscription. I got really angry. But yeah. So I don't, yeah.
But then it could have been since Sweden is so long.
Yeah.
You say nothing is outside of Sweden, but the same distance you can go
Yeah,
to Europe.
exactly. And then, I mean, another thought that I had was, again, we've got food behavior that is, since you're talking about other contexts, food behavior that is local food behavior, but how do we connect that to global food behavior and that relationship as well? I don't think I can take that on in this PhD, but I know those are issues also circulating.
Can I ask if you thought about why you use the word safari for your bicycle trail?
It's an expedition, sort of. I think of it as a journey, as an expedition. And for me personally, I grew up in South Africa, so it somehow relates to my childhood. Going and sort of looking at nature in I wouldn't even say we went on safaris because it was with the Polish scouts, but it was sort of came from that. And I think when I looked up the word, it was sort of a ground expedition, sort of a ground locating, a tracing, a looking at.
But also in terms of definition, it's to look at, it's to look at animals, for example, in their natural
environment,
habitat, usually in Kenya or wherever.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting in an urban context.
Interesting.
These are
I guess it is looking at animals in their natural built context in a way, so you could have applied it to that. I guess it is a form of urban behavior in a way. But yeah, good point, good question.
Made me think of a book I got years ago and haven't had a chance to pay much attention to. It's called Excursions. And it's by a man with the rather unfortunate name of Michael Jackson, poor man. Unfortunately, just because how would you go through life to me and say, well, I'm not that Michael Jackson, which is obvious because he's older and he's white and he's still living. But he's a theologian, he's a theologian and an ethnographer, and his way of conducting theology, he studies religion. Yeah, a scholar of theology, yeah. And his methodology is one of taking himself into going somewhere and reading it through his feet. And it seemed to me, the reason I liked it is because it's got a sort of a convergence between phenomenology and ethnography. He doesn't, he makes a point of the fact that he is actually going somewhere. He's setting himself in motion and visiting somewhere, and all his data and his observations are filtered through his own presence in motion in another space.
And the book name was Safaris?
It's called Excursions.
Excursions, sorry.
So it's like expedition,
That was
safari, and excursion, and there could be other
Excursions.
terms that point at different aspects of this idea of
Maybe.
yeah, that's an interesting one too. I think of doing it on your knees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And usually the way I think about safaris, or the way we would always have a map of where, because we used to do it in these large national parks in South Africa, where you could go anywhere, but you had to stick to the roads, let's say, or you would get eaten. It was as simple as that. So you had particular areas that they suggested you go to, and particular areas they suggested not to be, certain times of the day and things like that. So for me, very much during the safari, I created a survival guide. I should have brought one with me, I'm sorry. I did a little Gronalinen survival guide for anyone who might have gotten lost along the way, because of course I would want them to find us again and find the route to us. So in the safari guide, there's a little card for every sort of aspect of the safari, from the artist to the garden, to the map, to the group. And so with every safari you need a bit of a survival kit. So they were kind of, yeah, it was very playful. I really wanted to be playful with this. And I think with the planners that came along, I found that they were the most playful. They really enjoyed it. And this idea of it not being the regular way of having discussions around these topics, for them was very releasing. It kind of, they could put themselves in another spectrum, a bit closer to the people that they were designing for, in a sense. And I think just the way that Constance, that first sort of quote about making, sustaining our sustainable lives as a form of a pleasure, and I'm getting a bit tired, as a form of a pleasureful experience, I think very much has to be playful and creative, and almost not really knowing, and also getting lost. You have to get lost along the way. I love Solnit's. Has anyone read Solnit's book, Rebecca Solnit's book, A Guide to Getting Lost? It's really lovely. Guide to Idleness. We were talking about idleness today, and it's an important thing to program into our lives as well.
Any other final thoughts? I can say thank you very much to both Anna-Maria and to Veronica.
Thank you.
Yes.